All right. Well, welcome everyone. Glad that you could make it with us today. We are going to get our music cut here in a second. Very Zen music, but this is not a Zen topic today. We're going to be action-packed with our guest Nikki. And hold on, I'm getting a note on our technical end about the music, but hopefully. Oh, do you guys not hear me? Can you let me know in the chat if you hear me? And then, yep, they can hear me fine. So Seth, on your end, well, Seth can't hear me. Hold on, sorry. Sorry, we're having a little technical and slash human difficulties. Okay, music stopped. Perfect. So, oh, it's back. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to talk over as much as I can. Bear with us just for a moment. Okay, I think it's gone for good. So welcome. And I'm going to have to be texting my slide coordinator because he can't hear me to go to the next slide. But if you are here to hear about community engagement with Nikki Ingram, you are in the right place, and specifically about outreach and education in the youth. And what I love about this, it's going to be great and energetic, and I'm going to wait in a second and call up Nikki and let you mostly tell her about herself. But what I love about this is that she really ties this to our workforce challenge in water. So Nikki, hold on just for a moment, and I'm going to call you back up in just a moment. But if you go to the next slide, Seth, Rogue Water Lab really exists to help the water sector build up public trust through better engagement. So whether that's with our youth, like Nikki's going to talk about, or with our community and ratepayers, or with our elected officials, how do we get out the messaging, listen better, engage better, and work better to build the trust in water and wastewater services and the public health that we do with our communities? So real quickly, wanted to tell you about an opportunity coming up that is Catalyst. So there's limited seatings. Catalyst is a 3-day, what I like to call a communications and trust building accelerator, where you'll really be equipped with the skill set to go home, really get started, and do better in your own community. This year, it's in California, August 31st through September 3rd. And the limited seating, so you'll want to reserve as soon as you can. And then the deadline to get in your room block with in the historic Westgate Hotel with our discounted room block is August 10th. So wanted to tell you guys about that. And if we go to the next slide, one thing new about Catalyst this year is we have one-day workshop available ahead of Catalyst on August 31st. In the morning, we have a visualization session with Glenn Barnes from Water Finance Assistance, and we'll really talk about. Some of you may have attended a previous webinar we did with Glenn on this. It was super popular. We got a lot of great feedback of wanting more on that. So he has a 4-hour session where we really go deep and dig into how to make better charts and graphics and all of that for our online or public presentations. Because if we're honest, as an industry, we kind of suck at this. And so, how do we communicate our story and the data we're trying to show in a better visual way? And then later in the afternoon, after a quick lunch break, another optional webinar with Chrissy Hirosky, who is going to do a public speaking workshop. How do we get better and win over hearts and minds with our messaging? So both of those are optional. You can take one or both or none. One other thing to know, if you have friends in California who are just in the area and they can only dedicate one day, they can come to these workshops even without coming to Catalyst. Next slide. The other thing we have going, if any of you online are elected officials, utility general managers, CEOs, directors, or with a board or commission of a utility, we have partnered with Association of Regional Water Organizations and the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies this year to do a board governance workshop. So this is for utility directors, general managers, and their board or commission members. This is something that's not really offered in the water space, and we got together and just really feel like there is this gap in the industry where the board governed and commission governed utilities don't have as much of an opportunity for professional development for their board members. And so we've got a great list of speakers and a workshop session set up. All of that is on our website, and I'll put that in the chat momentarily. So invite your general manager, and they can come out to San Diego with you. So with that, if we go to the next slide, and I'll welcome Nikki on. So, Nikki is a project engineer at the city of Tyler, so Tyler Water Utilities. And I've come across her in the sector. She might be blowing up your LinkedIn feed recently because I think it was last year, she'll correct me if not, or the year before, she came out with this children's book. And she also does a lot with youth education in schools. And so, Nikki is going to come on to tell us about that, and welcome, and I'll turn it over.
Hey, thanks, Chelsea. Let me get my screen shared. Hold on, bear with me. Okay, making sure I share the right one. All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yep, looks great.
Okay. Um, so, hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. I know everyone has a busy schedule. Um, And I really appreciate you spending part of your lunch hour with me. For those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Nikki Ingram, like Chelsea said. I'm a project engineer with Tyler Water Utilities in East Texas. I'm also the East Texas trustee for the American Water Works Association and the WHEAT K through 12 Outreach Committee Chair. Outside work, I'm also a mom of 2 kids, almost 3. I have a third child arriving in almost about 5 or 6 weeks. But being a parent has really changed the way I think about education, the future, and the responsibility we have to leave this industry stronger than we found it. I believe the water industry is one of the most rewarding careers a person can have. Every day we protect public health, safeguard the environment, and provide a service every community depends on. Yet, despite how essential our work is, most people have no idea what we actually do. And that realization was shaped by 2 experiences I had in the past couple years. The first was during Rogue Water Lab's Catalyst program that Chelsea was just talking about. I began looking at work through the lens of public trust. I'm an engineer. I didn't learn about public trust in school or communication or any of that. But during this program, I realized trust isn't built only during emergencies. It's built every day through education, communication, and relationships. And then the second experience I had was the Transformative Water Leadership Academy, where I was challenged to ask a simple but powerful question. And it was, how can we make the water industry even better for the future? It's already a great industry to work in, but how can we make it even better? As I reflected on those experiences, the answer I kept coming back to each time was youth outreach. Because, like many of you, I didn't even know the industry existed until I entered the workforce. Growing up, I turned on the faucet and clean water came out. I flushed the toilet and everything disappeared. I actually lived behind a massive underground pump station in the middle of Dallas that I didn't know existed until I worked for the city of Dallas. And my parents didn't know what that was either. They told me it was like an electrical thing under transformers. So I thought it was really interesting when I got to go in it for the first time after living there over 25 years. But I never thought about the people or infrastructure working behind the scenes in water utilities. And when I entered the industry, like I said, I was amazed everything that happens to protect public health. And I remember trying to explain my first job to my family, only to realize they had no idea this world even existed too. And that's where today's presentation begins. The more I learned, the more I kept asking myself one question: how can people value something they've never had the opportunity to understand? And that question inspired me to write a couple children's books, spend time in classrooms, and become really passionate about youth outreach. Today, I'd like to share why I believe youth outreach isn't just a nice thing for utilities to do. I believe it's one of the smartest long-term investments we can make as utilities for building public trust, inspiring the next generation of water professionals, and helping our communities better understand the incredible value of the work we do every day. And I think that starts with something we don't often think about. It starts with the language we use. Before we talk about children or outreach, I think we have to acknowledge something about our profession. As utility professionals, we spend years learning the technical side of our job. We become comfortable using terms like sludge, hydraulic loading, clarifiers, and coagulation. Those words become second nature because we use them every day. They're how we design systems, operate treatment plants, communicate with the regulators, and work with one another. After a while, we stop thinking of them as technical terms because to us, they're our everyday language. And this really became clear to me when my husband started working in the power generation industry recently. Come home talking about fugitive dust logs and coal combustion residuals and ash ponds and slag. And he'll say words like, I should know what they mean. And he'll explain these to me, and I'll just kind of nod along. But if I'm being honest, I'm gonna have to ask him again next month because it just doesn't stick in my brain what those things are. But it made me stop to think that's how he probably feels when I talk to him about my job. And that's exactly what we do to the public. We talk about chlorine residuals and send them annual water quality reports and spend millions of dollars replacing filters as though everyone understands what we're talking about. But why would they? They've never worked in the industry or spent years learning the science behind what they do. Most of them have never even seen a treatment plant. These people we serve aren't thinking about treatment processes or engineering terminology. All they care about is having clean water when they turn on the faucet, taking a clean shower, knowing their family is safe, and trusting the water they drink, and having reliable service every day. Those are the outcomes they experience, and that's the language they understand. When we communicate using only technical terminology, we're asking people to translate something they've never been taught. That's not their job, it's ours. Our responsibility isn't to remove the science or oversimplify our work. It's to translate the science into language people can understand and connect with. because when people understand why something matters, they're much more likely to value it. And once we start thinking about communication that way, we realize our biggest challenge isn't just the language we use. It's that most people never see the work happening behind the scenes. And in many ways, that's actually a sign we're doing our jobs well. When everything is working the way it should, people rarely have to think about us at all. In this industry, we're often the victims of our own success. Think about your morning today. You probably brushed your teeth, you took a shower, made coffee. Chances are you never stopped to think about where the water came from or everything that had to happen before it reached your home. I'm guilty of this all the time. When we do our jobs, well, people don't have to think about us. Nobody writes a Facebook post saying, "My water pressure was fabulous today." Nobody calls the utility just to say, "Thanks for another day of safe drinking water." People simply expect it to be there. The only time most people notice our industry is when something goes wrong. A water main breaks, rate increases, a boil water notice is issued. Those moments often become the public's perception of utilities, even though they represent only a small, tiny fraction of what we do. The reality is that every single day, thousands of people are working across the country to behind the scenes to make sure those problems never happen. Our work is so invisible, but that's also why communication is important. If people only hear about us during emergencies, they're never going to understand the incredible work that's happening every other day of the year. And when people don't see the work happening behind the scenes, it becomes harder to appreciate the value it brings to our communities. And that's why outreach matters in general. When people don't understand what happens behind the scenes, the impact goes far beyond simply not knowing where their water comes from. It affects the way they think about our industry. It affects public trust. If people only hear about utilities during emergencies or viral conspiracy theories, those moments can quickly become their entire impression of what we do. They don't see the thousands of routine inspections, preventative maintenance activities, lab tests, infrastructure improvements, and operational decisions that keep water safe every single day. Understanding builds appreciation, and appreciation builds trust, but it also unpacks funding and support. Think about something like, let's just say, cryptocurrency. I have friends who absolutely love it and tell me I should invest in it all the time. They explain it to me, and it sounds like it makes perfect sense to them, but I still don't fully understand it. Because I don't understand it, I'm hesitant to invest my money in it, but they're willing to invest all of theirs in it. Infrastructure can be the same way. When communities understand the work happening behind the scenes, they're much more likely to recognize the value of investing in infrastructure before something fails. And they're more likely to be okay if we have to raise rates because they understand why we need to take care of the infrastructure. Finally, it impacts our future workforce. Most young people have never considered a career in water or wastewater, and it's not because they aren't interested, but because they've never been exposed to it. You can't be inspired by a career you've never seen before. That's why outreach is about so much more than education. It's about building trust, strengthening public support, inspiring future careers, and helping communities understand the value of one of our most essential services we provide. So, if we want people to better understand our industry, the best place to start isn't when they're already adults and have their minds made. We should start much earlier. Why start with children? The answer is actually pretty simple. We already teach children about things that matter. We teach them about recycling, fire safety, seat belts, healthy eating, and dental hygiene long before they're responsible for making those decisions themselves. We start early because we know those lessons shape the way they think for the rest of their lives. So, why should water be any different? The children sitting in classrooms today aren't just students. There are future operators, engineers, utility directors, environmental scientists, mechanics, electricians, lab techs. Some will become city managers and elected officials, making decisions about infrastructure investments or creating policies at a national level. Even if they've never worked in the industry, though, every single one of them will become a customer, a voter, a ratepayer, and someone who depends on clean, reliable water every day. That's why youth outreach is about so much more than inspiring future careers. It's about helping the next generation understand the value of water before they're making decisions about it. Because when people understand where their water comes from, what it takes to protect it, and the people working behind the scenes, they're more likely to appreciate it, support it, and invest in it. To me, that's why starting early matters. And that led me to ask a different question. What if we stopped trying to explain water the way engineers understand it and started teaching them the way children learn? As utility professionals, our instinct is usually to explain more, create more diagrams, another process flow, another presentation, another handout. Those tools are incredibly valuable because they're how we communicate with each other, but they're not how the best way we connect with children. If we're going to teach children, we first have to recognize that children learn differently. There's actually reasons stories are so effective. Cognitive research has shown that our brains naturally organize information into stories. When new information is connected to characters, emotion, and a sequence of events, it's much more likely to be stored in long-term memory than a list of disconnected facts. Stories provide context, and context help people understand and remember what they've learned. Think back to your favorite book or movie growing up. You probably don't remember every line, but I bet you remember the characters, the adventure, how it made you feel, the first scary movie you ever watched. In fact, I guess I'd probably bet money many of you could tell me exactly what happens if you give a mouse a cookie. He's gonna ask for a glass of milk. Most of us haven't read that book in years, but we'll still remember it. That's the power of storytelling. So instead of asking children to step into our world of engineering, I started thinking about how to bring our world into theirs. What if learning about wastewater happened on the way to a birthday party instead of through a process flow diagram? What if learning about drinking water became a magical adventure with wizards and princesses instead of a technical lecture? What if we could take the exact same science and simplify it in a way that matched how children naturally learn? The science doesn't change, the treatment processes don't change, only the way we told the story would change. And I wanted to find out if that simple change could make a difference. So that led me to create two children's books. That idea became my Transformative Water Leadership Academy project. I decided to write my first book called Ripple's Magical Wastewater Treatment Plant Adventure. It follows a little water droplet named Ripple on an unexpected journey through a real wastewater treatment plant on his way to get clean. Along the way, children experience each step of the treatment process in a fun, engaging story while learning how wastewater is actually cleaned before it's returned to the environment. Then I wrote Ripple's Water Quest, which celebrates Drinking Water Week, and by taking children on a magical adventure to discover where their drinking water comes from and how it's treated. Both books are built on the same philosophy. Treatment processes are real, the science is real. The only thing that changed was the way the story was told. Instead of asking children to memorize technical processes, we invite them on a fun adventure they'll actually remember. I take what we see every day and present it in a way that everyone can finally understand. On the left is a real secondary clarifier, the way we see it, immediately recognizing what's happening. Think about settling solids, sludge blankets, clarified effluent flowing over the weirs, but a child doesn't have that background. So on the right, it's the exact same process told in a way they can relate to. Instead of seeing an intimidating piece of infrastructure, they see a story they can follow. They're still learning the treatment process. They're just learning it in a language they understand. And that's how we make complex infrastructure feel accessible instead of intimidating. It's the same science, same engineering, simply translated into a story. And once children understand something, they naturally become curious. And that's where the real magic begins. And that's exactly what started happening when children were reading it. They didn't just remember the story, they started talking about it. They asked questions. They wanted to know where their water came from and how wastewater was cleaned and why treatment plants looked the way they did. For me, that was one of the biggest indicators that this approach was working. Because when children start asking questions, they're no longer just listening, they're engaged. But something else happened that I never expected. The learning didn't stop with the child. Sometimes a parent was reading the story to their kid before bed. Teachers became educated reading the stories to children during school. And other times, the children became the teachers. They couldn't wait to go home and explain what they had learned to their parents, grandparents, or siblings. The conversation left the classroom and entered the home. And that's incredibly powerful because now you're not just educating one child, you're helping an entire household better understand where their water comes from, what happens after they flush, and why all of it matters. That's when I realized these stories weren't just teaching children, they were creating conversations that families had probably never had before. And those conversations were really exciting to hear. But I wanted to know whether the learning was measurable, so I decided to put it to the test. I wanted to collect real data. So every time I visited a classroom, I asked students the same questions before we read the book. Over time, I've surveyed more than 200 kids in kindergarten through fifth grade to better understand what they already knew. The first question was, where does wastewater go after you flush the toilet? I was surprised to find that not a single student could explain where wastewater goes or what a wastewater treatment plant does. The answers they gave were very priceless. By far, the most common response was, it goes to the Ninja Turtles. Honestly, if you're 6 years old, that answer makes perfect sense. Think about it. They've seen the Ninja Turtles living in the sewer on TV and in movies. That's a story they've heard over and over again. If no one has ever told them a different story about what happens after they flush the toilet, why wouldn't they believe that's where sewer goes? It was actually a perfect example of something we just talked about. Children remembering stories. If we don't tell the story of water, something else will fill the gap. The second question I asked was, where does your drinking water come from? Only about 7% of students answered correctly. Most of the answers were the water tower, the sink, pipes, the faucet. Those results confirmed something I'd been wondering all along. Those weren't concepts children couldn't understand. They were simply concepts they had never been introduced to. And that made me even more excited to see what would happen after they heard the story. Children didn't just remember the story, they started talking about it. They asked a lot of questions. They wanted to know where their own water came from, how wastewater was clean, why treatment plants looked the way they did. For me, that was one of the biggest indicators that this approach was working. Because when children start asking questions, they're no longer just listening, they're engaged. When but something else happened that I never expected. The learning didn't stop with just the child. Um, sorry. Um, okay. So after we finished reading the books, I asked those exact same questions again. The difference was remarkable. Every student was able to explain where wastewater goes after they flush the toilet. They could describe how it travels through the pipes to a wastewater treatment plant where it's cleaned before it returns to the environment. Um, and they could describe the processes. When we talked about drinking water, every student could identify where their source water comes from. For me, the most exciting part wasn't the numbers themselves. It was listening to the students explain these concepts in their own words. They weren't simply repeating vocabulary they just heard. They understood the journey. They understood why treatment plants exist and why clean water doesn't just magically appear when they turn on the faucet. In education, going from 0 to 100% comprehension in under 30 minutes is almost unheard of. That experience reinforced something I had been hoping was true. Children are absolutely capable of understanding water and wastewater. The challenge isn't that science is too complicated. The challenge is introducing it in a way that's engaging, relatable, and connected to something they already understand. And I think that's a lesson that extends far beyond children's book. Whether we're talking to elementary students, elected officials, community members, or even our own friends and family, people learn best when we connect new information to something familiar. We don't have to simplify the science. We simply have to make it meaningful. And the best part is, water is already meaningful to kids because they use it every day. We just have to tell them the story. When we talk about Water 2050, the conversation usually focuses on technologies. We talk about AI, advanced treatment, PFAS, water reuse, digital infrastructure twins, and all the incredible innovations that will shape the future of our industry. Those conversations are very important, but I believe there's another part of Water 2050 that deserves just as much attention. It's about the people who operate, maintain, lead, and use those systems. Think about a fifth grader today. By the year 2050, they'll be in the middle of their career. Some will be operators or engineers. Some will be utility directors, policymakers, mechanics, electricians, city managers, or elected officials. Others will simply become customers making decisions that affect the future of water. Whether they work in the industry or not, they'll all play a role in the future of our communities. And if you're sitting here thinking, I'll probably be retired by then, so this doesn't really affect me, I'd encourage you to think about it a little differently. Even in retirement, you'll still drink the water they treat. You'll still depend on the infrastructure they maintain. You'll still be affected by forever chemicals that are in the water, and you'll still rely on the decisions they make to keep your community safe. That's why I believe youth outreach is really about legacy. Every person in this room has spent years designing, operating, maintaining, or protecting water infrastructure. Part of that legacy isn't just treatment plants we build or the pipelines we replace. It's helping prepare the people who will one day inherit them. Because when we invest in educating today's students, we're investing in the future of our communities. Everything we've talked about today leads to this. The way people understand water today will directly shape what happens tomorrow. It influences what communities prioritize, what they choose to protect, and what they're willing to invest in. Because if people don't understand what we do, they won't fully value it. And if they don't value it, they won't fund it. And if it's not funded, it's not going to work. And that's why this matters to every one of us in this on this webinar today. I was at our city's local library's summer kickoff event last month, and I was volunteering at our water utilities booth, talking with children about where their drinking water comes from, handing out little personalized swag like color changing cups and silly putty. And after talking with one little girl and her mom, the mom looked at me and said, I honestly thought water towers were a myth, and I thought they were just for decoration. I laughed because I wasn't expecting that answer to come from an adult. And then it hit me. If someone doesn't know why a water tower exists and thinks it's just decoration, it's going to be difficult for them to understand why a city might need to spend $18 million to build to build a new 2 million gallon water tank. They're not opposed to investing in the infrastructure because they don't care and they don't want it. They're opposed because no one's ever explained what the infrastructure actually does and why it's so important. That's exactly why this outreach matters. When people understand the purpose behind our infrastructure, they're more likely to appreciate it, support it, and recognize the value of investing before it fails. So the question becomes, what can utilities actually do? The good news is that meaningful youth outreach doesn't require a huge budget or a full-time education department. Every single utility, regardless of its size, can start making a difference. I'm going to share with you a few ideas that have worked with me and other utilities around and how they can adapt to fit to their community. Sometimes the best place to start is going where the kids already are. Children are already learning in classrooms, they're already visiting libraries, and they're already at community-sponsored events. Those places are incredible opportunities for utilities to show up and tell their story, and most times they're free. Um, you don't need a complicated outreach program. It can be as simple as reading to an elementary classroom, showing up for career day at your local schools, and partnering with the schools during STEM week or engineering week to teach kids how to build their own filter out of a simple, cheap materials like cotton balls and coffee filters. I've even gotten involved in judging a regional science fair in East Texas for the Stockholm Junior Water Prize, which is a national, it's a state level that goes to a national prize that celebrates science fair projects that are related to water. The goal isn't to give a technical presentation, it's just to create a connection between kids and water. You can also work with your local libraries. They always host lots of youth activities during the summer, and they have a lot of homeschooling events that they do throughout the year. Have utility workers go and read to a class during one of their story times at the library. You can also volunteer to have booths at local community events. There's Earth Day, the State Fair, Farmers Market. We have Bees Day. I volunteered at community booths where I did something as simple as fill a bucket with water and tell kids to guess the weight of the water in the bucket. And you're gonna laugh at some of their answers. They want to try to lift it up and it's too heavy, and then they're gonna go, well, this weighs 5,000 pounds, when it actually only weighs less than 20. But they wrote their answers down on a piece of paper, and whoever was closest at the end got a little $15 personalized utility prize. That whole event cost $15 and 4 hours of my time. But the kid who won even left the event early before I announced the prize. So I had to call the phone number on the ticket, and her and her parents came and picked up the prize from the water billing office that next Monday. So guess who got to see the water administration building for the first time? The little girl and her parents, because they paid their bill online. They had never been in person. Um, but also at that booth, I talked to at least 100 kids and their parents and guardians and taught them about water. I've been amazed over and over again about how many times the parents say, wow, I never knew that's where our drinking water comes from. I go fishing in that lake all the time. Um, I've I've talked about this throughout the presentation. When we go where kids are we often end up reaching their parents too. What starts as children's events and education for youth becomes an opportunity to educate an entire family. That's why I believe every classroom visit, every library story time, every career day, and every community event matters. You never know whose perspective you're going to change. Of course, there's another type of outreach that's just as powerful. Instead of bringing water to the children, sometimes we can bring children to water. There's something about seeing a treatment plan in person that changes the way people think about water. A clarifier isn't just a picture in a book anymore. The pumps, filters, lab equipment suddenly become real. Children begin to see that clean water doesn't just happen. It's a result of thousands of people, processes, and decisions working together every single day. For many students, a plant tour is also the first time they've met the people behind the infrastructure. They get to talk with operators, engineers, lab techs who are passionate about what they do. Those conversations help students realize that water isn't just a utility, it's a career filled with opportunities to make a real difference in their community. Utilities can create these experiences in different ways, whether it's hosting school field trips, welcoming Boy and Girl Scout troops, partnering with local colleges and engineering programs. Every experience helps make our industry a little more visible. You don't have to teach every detail of the treatment process during a tour. Sometimes the most important thing is simply giving a child the opportunity to see what we've built, meet the people who make it possible, and leave thinking, I never knew this existed. Of course, none of these outreach efforts happen without the people behind them. And I believe one of the greatest outreach resources every utility already has isn't a book or treatment plant, it's the people who work there every day. As we've talked through all these outreach ideas, you may have noticed something. None of them require a professional speaker or dedicated communications department. They simply require people who care about what they do. One of the greatest outreach resources every utility already has is the people joining this webinar today. Operators, engineers, laboratory analysts, customer service representatives, HR, and communication staff. Every one of us has a story to tell about how we protect public health and serve our communities. People trust people. When a child meets an operator who genuinely loves their job, they're not just learning about water, they're connecting with the people behind it. Those personal interactions are often what they remember long after the tour, the classroom visit, or the community event is over. I also believe we have responsibility to tell our own story, because if we don't, someone else will. And too often, the public only hears about our industry through a news story, or bad social media posts complaining about water rates. Those moments become the entire story. Even though they represent only a tiny fraction of what we do every day, that's why it's so important that we proactively share the positive stories too, about all the incredible, dedicated professionals working behind the scenes to keep our water safe. No one can tell that story better than the people who live it every single day. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned through this journey is that storytelling isn't a separate outreach program. It's a strategy that can strengthen the outreach we're already doing. Imagine a fourth grade class walking into a treatment plant after they've already learned the story of how water is cleaned. Instead of seeing confusing collection of pipes, they recognize the clarifier and the filters. They understand that the operator is explaining because they already have a foundation. The same idea applies to classroom visits. Instead of giving students a list of technical terms to memorize, we give them a story that helps those concepts make sense. Career days become more meaningful because students already know what the water industry is and why it matters. Even community events become more impactful because you're building on understanding that already exists instead of starting from scratch every single time. They might even see a familiar face and say, Hey, I know that operator. When outreach activities are connected instead of isolated, each one reinforces the next. A story leads to a classroom visit leads to a plant tour leads to a conversation at home, and that conversation builds awareness, and that awareness builds trust. The goal isn't simply to hand a child a book. The goal is to create experiences that people remember because people remember stories and they also remember experiences. And when they remember those experiences, they begin to value the incredible work our utilities do every single day. Um, that's why I don't see storytelling as entertainment. I see it as one of the most effective communication strategies our industry has available because stories spark understanding, and understanding builds connection, and then connection builds trust. Every one of us are like a single drop of water. By itself, one drop doesn't seem like much, but we all know what happens when one drop becomes many. It creates ripples. And eventually, those ripples spread further than we ever imagined. I think outreach works the same way. Every classroom visit is a droplet. Every plant tour is a droplet. Every career day conversation, every library story time, every drinking water week booth event, every operator who volunteers to go visit a school, every engineer who volunteers, every parent who reads with their child. Every one of those moments may seem small on its own, but together they create something much bigger. They create understanding, and understanding changes the way people see water. When people understand where their water comes from, they value it. And when they value it, they're more likely to protect it, and they're more likely to support the infrastructure that keeps it safe. They're more likely to appreciate the people working behind the scenes, and they're more likely to invest it and support in infrastructure upgrades. That's why youth education is one of the most important investments our industry can make. We're investing in the future of utilities. Every child will grow up making decisions about water. Like I said, they're all going to have different careers. Some will be operators, some may be policymakers, some may be teachers, some can be elected officials, and some will just be parents raising the next generation. Every one of them will help shape the future of our communities. And that's why this work starts much earlier than we often think. It starts with curiosity, it starts with connection, it starts with one conversation. Um, so I'd like you to leave you with this challenge. When you go back to your utility today, don't ask yourself, what huge outreach program can we build? Instead, ask yourself, what's one drop we can create? It's one classroom, one plant tour, one library event, one career day, one conversation. Because one droplet creates a ripple, and enough ripples can change an entire community. So that, oh, whoops. So that is the end of my presentation today. Once again, thanks guys for taking the time out of your day to come and sit through this. And I just want to see if y'all had any questions or ideas that anybody wanted to share. I didn't have the chat open, but now
Yeah,
I
Nikki,
see
that was
there's
so
lots of
good. You're
people.
getting a lot of reactions, and we'll take questions. We got a couple in the Q&A that we're going to get to in just a moment. And then I do encourage everyone to kind of look at the other resources and ideas people are putting in the chat from Justin, Michael, Nate, Morgan. Those are really good as well. Your first question is, um, we know you are an engineer at your utility, and you talked about like this doesn't take a dedicated communication staff, and you're involved in this work anyway without being like on a dedicated communications team. Someone was curious what your thoughts are around engaging on like social media, TikTok and Instagram. Does your utility do that? Do you have any thoughts around that?
So our utility does do that. We have a dedicated communications team that handles all of our social media. One idea I've heard in the past, and I think it was from you, Chelsea, is that your own utility can have a social media. And I think that's a great idea. We're just at the city of Tyler aren't there yet to have our own. We have our city's the City of Tyler social media that we use, but it's a great tool. We use it to update the public on events, and that's also a great way to advertise, like, hey, we're going to be at the summer library kickoff event. Come see us. And so that tool can be used to support your outreach efforts and even brag. Like if you went to a school, take a video or a picture. Have one of the teachers take a picture of your operator, engineer, or communication specialist going to reading to those kids or doing an activity with those kids, post it on social media so that the parents can see, hey, they're out teaching kids about water. I think that's a great idea.
You got a good question about, can you talk about the process of working with an artist and illustrator to interpret the information and translate it into the book? What was your book writing process?
So that was actually one of the hardest parts about doing the book. I think along the way, I thought that like, oh, it's going to be hard to do this and to write it, to come up with the idea, to come up with the storyline, to refine everything. And then I found out one of the hardest parts was actually trying to communicate what I was talking about to the illustrator. That process alone in itself took a really long time, probably over half of the entire time, maybe like three-fourths of the time to do the book. Because I can show them a picture of a clarifier and say, I need it to look like this. I want, the wizard sitting in the middle of the clarifier, and it just wasn't turning out how I expected. And I didn't realize how hard it was. But if the illustrator doesn't understand what the process is, they're not going to understand how to draw it. I thought they could just look at a picture and draw it, but when you start trying to actually show the process and animate the concepts, it's really difficult.
I think that's so
Uh,
good. It speaks to just our industry and how we talk. There's something called the curse of knowledge, and when you know something so well, you can't remember what it's like to not know it. And so, even sometimes when we think we're talking in simple language, we just simply aren't. So that's really good. As we wait for some more questions to come in, well, I'll throw this one at you. Someone just was curious about your thoughts on like bridging the gap between associations and the actual resources that their utilities like public outreach efforts can have. So just, mentioning the book is a great resource. And I guess this person probably is just feeling like where to get resources from utilities. I'll throw in my answer for that. Morgan talked about Project Wet in the chat. Nate is in the chat with STEM Hero, and those are specific places with the resources, like Nikki's book as well.
yeah, and I know AWWA and the Water Environment Association of Texas. I know they have great resources. They've got videos, they've got free coloring sheets, and that's something I've also had out at booths. I went and printed out a few hundred copies of some coloring sheets, and they have mazes and I Spy games and crossword puzzles and all kinds of fun activities that kids like, and those are free. You can print them out, hand them out to kids. One of those, I think one of the mazes shows like the process of how water gets from the treatment plant to a house. And that's the one that I used for the booth that I was talking about, where the mom asked about where or she didn't know about what a water tank was, or that water tanks were real. So, but I was walking kids through the process whenever they came up, because it's so simple and easy. It takes less than a minute to kind of just quickly, show them the treatment plant, tell them it goes through pipes, goes to a water tower, and then goes to their house. So,
And we
those are
have
great free resources.
Adam in the chat with a Happy Camper does curriculum as well. So lots of resources in the chat. Someone mentioned EPA Water Sense program. Obviously, I'll plug Catalyst again. Rogue really tries to equip people with how to, change their heart and really inspire to do better. And specifically on some of the things Nikki talked about earlier in her presentation, the behavioral science and neuroscience around how we engage with people. When we change our engagement to focus on how people actually listen and learn, the data and research behind how, and you had some comments during your presentation about this, Nikki, how kids go back to their parents and then parents feel this kind of like values driven moral obligation to like please their kid and support their kid. So when their kid asks them to do something, all of that is true. And I think the water sector, yeah, responding to that and engaging in these more unique ways is a great idea. One other thing I'll share, and we have a couple more minutes while I'm sharing this, if people have questions either in the chat or the Q&A, we'll see them. I loved your story about the woman with the water tower, but I also want to have a lot of grace for that person because I came into water background in journalism, degree in like public policy, government relations. I don't know science very well. I definitely don't know engineering. We have Jane Hurley in the chat. I used to work at a utility with Jane. on a communications team to start and would go to all these events with her. And she had a great event similar to some of yours where you had a water bucket and PVC pipes. And she showed kids how like water pressure worked with the water tower. I learned as like a 20 something year old how water pressure worked in her kids' activity by learning how to do that. And to juxtaposition, then I got to teach my son when we passed water towers. He was like 3 or 4, asked what that was. I told him, I explained how it works, and now he knows, and now he talks about it. He also thinks like water careers are super cool, which obviously I know it's because he's my son, but really goes to show like how an example of how everything you're talking about really can work. One last question, or maybe we have time for another after this, but someone says, do you have thoughts about using AI to build resources for the water sector? And some of these, like you can feel free to share your thoughts or not, but
Yeah, I think that's a real controversial topic. But I know as a utility and an industry, we're using AI, to create digital twins, to run some of these SCADA systems. Um, I know they have the pressure, they have some kind of AI pressure logs that are out. And they can AI leak detection. It's getting put in our industry, and I feel like that's whether we like it or not. AI is going to be used. So I don't. People use AI so much that I don't. I think if you're using it for a valuable resource, it would be okay. But I know that's a really controversial topic, because the AI uses water and all the data centers that it takes.
this
But
next
that
question,
doesn't.
Nikki. Yeah, that's good. And by the way, like on AI messaging, Rogue has some stuff we put on about that, so people can join into those. But this next question's really good, and this is actually a question I had for you too. So, Adam asks, how do you alleviate utility leaders' concerns about the metrics when sometimes the in-person creative work is really hard to measure? So, how do you get your leadership buy-in to go be in classrooms, to be at these events, to do this kind of work? um, to gain, trust and engagement.
Oh, I think I've lucked out. We've got a really good city council and city manager and mayor who understand why public outreach is so important. And when you start to invest time in it, you'll really get to see the benefits. I would suggest having um, your, bosses and local officials start maybe doing some a training or something on outreach and how effective it can be. Because once they understand it, it could be really, really valuable. And then you might not immediately see the results tomorrow, but after you've been doing it for a couple years, it really does start to pay off.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Nikki. I think this was so helpful. Thanks for everyone hopping in the chat and being engaging. We will share a recording of this. It will be online by tomorrow on Rogue Water Lab's YouTube page. And lastly, I'll remind you at Catalyst this year, actually, we're going into the last question that Adam shared. We're going into like data center community engagement, messaging on water reuse. So we have a lot of great things in store for you. So thanks again, Nikki, and see everybody next time.